Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very exciting segment today on the 19th day of May. Hey, apologies for a bit of a late start. We had to do a restart of the studio things, reset few things, but it's up and running now. So, as I mentioned before, that it's a great day out today here in Brisbane. 10 degrees, but still it doesn't feel that cold, as that cold factor as we talked about before. What it really feels like. But right now, let's take a look at news in brief.
A woman with dementia remains in a critical condition in hospital in the New South Wales town of Cooma after she was tasered by police. Claire Nowland is alleged to have been carrying a knife when officers tasered her after being called to her aged care facility. Police have launched an internal investigation with advocates calling for better training.
In breaking news overnight, New Zealand police have arrested a man and charged him with arson over the fire at a Wellington hostel that killed at least 6 people. The man will face Wellington District Court later today on 2 counts of arson, with police saying he could still face more serious charges. Police have begun removing bodies from the Loafers Lodge.
An 18-year-old driver faces court later today on 7 charges related to a hit-run collision on Sydney's Lower North Shore that put 3 young boys in hospital. The boys, aged 12 and 13, suffered minor to serious injuries, none of them life-threatening, as they crossed an intersection of the Pacific Highway and Falcon Street at Crow's Nest.
Homicide squad detectives are investigating after a 16-year-old boy was stabbed to death near a train station in Melbourne's west. Police arrived at Station Place in Sunshine yesterday afternoon to find a 16-year-old boy from Melton South with injuries. He was treated by paramedics but died at the scene. Another 16-year-old boy was taken to hospital with minor injuries.
There's the news in brief, and right now let's take at some of the key news for today. The first one, ACICC proposes fair and reasonable lift to minimum wage.
I think from a business point of view, we're saying that an outcome of about 3.5%, that's fair and reasonable. That's consistent with the Reserve Bank's inflation target, 2 to 3%, plus an allowance for productivity, plus the fact that there's some extra superannuation coming through, an extra 0.5% in superannuation from the middle of the year. We would have real concerns with what the ACTU is saying, 7%. Honestly, we think that it's not responsible. And the other thing I think we've got to say here is that we would say they are really trying to put one over on the Fair Work Commission, on the government and on the public.
All right, but the coverage here is genuinely for the lowest of low paid in Australia, not always doing jobs that people would choose to do in other circumstances. Aren't they entitled to a degree of catch-up, given that they've been lagging behind inflation for some 2 years almost now?
Well, the thing that's going to serve the interests of the most vulnerable is to have a responsible wage increase that will ensure that they can stay in jobs. That's going to be the best way to get ahead, not to have an outcome which is going to feed back into costs, feed back into inflation and run the risk that interest rates are going to be higher. And I think this is the key point. What the ACTU are saying, honestly, their position is an attempt to hoodwink people, because in the end it is those more vulnerable people, the ones on the lowest wages, they're the ones who run the risk of losing their jobs first in the event that the economy turns down and the Reserve Bank keeps raising interest rates. That's what we've got to avoid.
All right, well, you're nominating a very clear number here in the context of a minimum wage case. What about the general workforce, though? Do you apply that figure of, a bit over 3.5% as the optimum number that should be granted in other agreements?
Look, sure, and I think this is what we're seeing out in the marketplace. Agreements coming between 3 to 4%, I think is quite representative at the moment. We need to look no further than what we saw in the wage price index data yesterday. 3.7% over the past year, the highest now for more than 10 years. That's what we're seeing there. And the other thing,
it's still half of inflation, right? At 7%.
But this is the whole point. It's not about chasing inflation. It's about getting inflation under control. That's the number one objective that we've got to achieve. And we won't do that if we keep chasing after it. We've got to get costs under control. We've got to get those prices coming back to that 2 to 3% range. And I mean, one thing here, Greg, is look no further than what the Commonwealth is offering its own public servants. They're putting forward an offer of 4%, 3.5%, 3%. So, you know, put their money where their mouth is. That's what they're offering to their public servants. That's what should be in front of the Commission.
All right, so you're saying that members or industry generally are reaching the end of their tether on the wage growth trajectory, are they? Well, what's the evidence, if that is the case, what is the evidence that it's hurting them?
Oh, look, I mean, here, one of the things, I mean, for small business, you know, they are suffering at the moment. That's where the biggest risk is. You need to look no further than what we're seeing in terms of the most recent insolvencies data. That's at 3.5-year highs, so it has started to increase. So it is hurting smaller businesses. We're seeing profitability declining in a lot of those sectors, so there's a lot of talk about profitability. Outside of mining, which has had very high commodity price increases, and of course that's been paying into, you know, resolving the deficit situation for the government. You know, that's where the real pain is.
But this is how markets work, don't they? When you have a shortage of labour, you can't find the staff, you pay a little more to get them. What's wrong with that?
Well, that's right. And as the price goes up, then so the demand begins to soften as well. And what we're seeing at the moment is across the economy, there are some sectors that are really starting to hurt. 11 interest rate increases are beginning to take their toll. And I think this is where it's going to be a very finely balanced situation going forward. But that is starting to hurt. Demand is coming off. And as a result of that, demand for employment is also starting to soften, and we're seeing that in the figures today.
All right, let's await the Commission's decision on that case. Can I take you, Andrew McKellar, to a broader question about the role of business in activism? I don't know if I want to say political activism, but activism in this country, because Peter Dutton has issued a call to arms to the gas industry today that if he became Prime Minister, he'd do certain things to repeal regulations for them. But he wants industry to do things with solidarity, to promote nuance and inject reason into public debate. Should business find and use a louder voice than it currently does in political matters?
Well, look, I don't think business needs any schooling or any encouragement. I mean, we will very strongly represent the issues that are of importance to our members and importance to the Australian economy. That's our role. Now, on energy policy, of course, there are some significant challenges, and some of the things he's pointing to in terms of the gas market, there are real issues there. And business is saying that. We're saying that publicly, and we're saying that to the government. We need long-term solutions. The situation in the gas market won't be solved in the long term by things like price caps. We have to have a clear signal that encourages firms, major international players, to continue to explore in Australia and to continue to produce in Australia, because gas is an important part of the transition.
Right, so you back this industry view, which has been expressed pretty loudly at the Adelaide conference with APIA, that the government has either already gone too far or is at risk of going too far and threatening investment in that industry?
Well, we need long-term solutions, and at the end of the day, you can't solve a situation of inadequate supply by capping the price. You can only take some pressure off in the short term, but we have to have that longer term supply. We have to be able to get the gas out of the ground. We have to get it to market, and you know, that's part of the reality. So,
and when should those caps come off in your?
Oh, we've got to get to that, I think, as soon as possible. It shouldn't be there for more than 12 months. What we have to do is provide signals about, you know, how we get the production back into the system and make sure that that's working effectively. That's the only way we're going to get the price down sustainably. Obviously, the international situation has been part and parcel of that, but we've got to be able to secure the supply for the domestic market as well as the export market.
And of course, always the two sides of the equation is, you know, the companies need to make a profit and then pass that on rather than just keeping. So that is the key factor there. Well, right now, let's take a look at the referendum on the voice.
Mick Gooder, welcome to 7:30. Thank you.
Now, you said today that you are, and you used the word terrified, that the yes side is going to lose the referendum. Why do you think that support has declined?
I think it declines over time. You know, you get the constitutional experts. I was involved when I was in the Human Rights Commission in the expert panel on constitutional recognition, and the things we learned then, a few important lessons. You know, if Australians don't know what they're voting for, they generally vote no, and you'll start on a high approval rating, and then it goes down over time. It was the same with the Republic referendum. So what I'm worried about now is these series of polls coming out showing decline in the yes support, and it's now starting to look like a trend to me, and that's when I started to turn my mind to what would this place look like if there was a no vote. And you used the word terrified, and I am actually terrified of what will happen to Australia as a country and to me as an Aboriginal advocate and lots of other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advocates. I would feel totally rejected by the Australian population, and the work I've done over the years and the work lots of people have done over the years would be repudiated.
The big debate at the moment is whether the Voice should be able to speak to the executive government as well as the Parliament. Now, you're proposing that you remove that aspect of the proposal, but wouldn't removing the Voice's ability to speak to executive government water down the impact of the Voice?
Well, the Uluru Statement and the Uluru Dialogues talked about a voice to Parliament. I wouldn't compromise on that, of course, otherwise what's the use of having a referendum? But I think in practical terms, and I've been around a bit, if there's a group of Aboriginal people put together that's broadly representative of the community across Australia, I don't think there's any doubt they would advise government anyway. And in reverse, while that group's there, the government would go to them fairly regularly about their opinions. So I don't know whether you need to have that bit in the Constitution. I think the voice to Parliament is enough. Our voice to Parliament is enough, so we can actually have that voice established in the Constitution. I think we will see it progress and evolve over time, and people will come to it. All sorts of people will come to it looking for advice because it would be broadly representative of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. At
the same time, Mick Gooda, a number of your colleagues, particularly those working on the referendum working group, have said that capacity for the Voice to make representations to the executive as well as Parliament is crucial for its future power and success, for it to be impactful. The question is, why would you give away something that your colleagues have worked so hard to include?
We've all worked at this, but it comes a time when you've got to make, the pragmatism has got to come to the fore here, and if this is one of the sticking points, and I'm told from people on the right side of politics, it's one of the sticking points, and one of the major sticking points for some people, I could see it not being that necessary, and I think the body would give advice to government anyway. So whether you need that in the Constitution, I'm not sure, but if it's one of those stumbling blocks that we're confronting right now, and we're seeing this downward trend in these polls, a no vote would be absolutely, the worst thing that could ever happen to us as Aboriginal people and to Australia as a nation, because we'd be looked around the world as the new South Africa, having rejected Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people when they ask something pretty simple. We want a voice to Parliament.
Now, have you talked to your colleagues on the referendum working group and the engagement group that you were part of? Have you talked to them about the possibility of making what will be a big step to cut out the right of the Voice to make representations to the executive?
I've had a couple of conversations. I think I guess a couple of them tried to counsel me on this, but I think it's important enough to make a stand here. I'm not one for being out in the media that much. Even when I was Social Justice Commissioner, I found it a bit of a drag to do media, to be quite honest. I work in the background. That's what my life was like before. And so I just think there's times when you just got to make a stand. And apart from people on the working group, there's been a lot of people ringing me today saying, I think you're sort of on the right track and keep on going. So we'll see what happens. I think sometimes you need that intervention from outside the insider group to throw something else on the table, and this is me having a go because I'm really worried about if the polls keep trending the way they are, that it's very likely there will be a no vote.
Now, aside from other Indigenous leaders, and you said you've had a lot of phone calls today after raising this possibility, have you spoken to either side of politics, either to the Prime Minister and his office or to Peter Dutton today about what you're proposing?
No, not at all. I've put. I'm sure I'll be talking to the Prime Minister's office shortly, but haven't done that yet, and haven't reached out to Peter Dutton's office at all. So I just sort of thought this is my contribution to this, because I'm thinking my kids, my grandkids, if there's a no vote, and I'm going to keep on fighting for the yes vote, even if that thing stays in there about advice to executive government. I will be out there campaigning hard for a yes vote. I don't think I can do anything else, and so says a lot of advocates.
So he will be campaigning hard for that, and as we know, there's debates and there's campaign going on both the sides. Well, Australia, this is your one chance to getting this right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our functions and events. Dewa, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. And don't forget that at 10 a.m. we have a very special interview today on the upcoming, the first ever Ganga Aarti to be held in Brisbane. So don't forget to tune in back at 10 a.m. for that very, very special interview when we'll have Saisa Leswar and Marina Chand right here in the studio to discuss the upcoming Ganga Aarti. Until then, it's goodbye from us.